Welcome to the Clifton Worley Show. This week, it's my pleasure to have Sean Wright from LollygaggerFx. What's up, Sean?
Hey, not much, Clifton. Thanks for having me on the show. I'm a big fan. I'm a podcast fiend, so I listen to all of them, but I definitely listen to your show.
Well, thank you. We've been trying to do this for quite a while,
Yes, we have.
and it just seems like life keeps happening and getting in the way. But I'm super stoked because we're finally doing this.
Yeah, me too. I've been looking forward to doing it, and I think between us having different things going on at the same time, I'll be available, you won't, you'll be available, I won't. I'm just glad we finally got to get it together to make it happen.
Yes, yes, me too. And we finally got to meet in person at
For like 10
yes.
seconds.
It was
And it
hectic.
was so funny because I planned on coming back the next day at NAM, and my two lovely children, we didn't get them passes because we didn't think they were interested in going.
Yeah.
So it was like they could go. So it was like after we were there a couple days, they're like, "Can we go do some other stuff?" And then anyway, so I got dragged away. So I never did come back the next day. So I felt very bad. I wanted to go to the house, hang out with you guys. So anyway, plans next year. We're definitely going to hang.
Yes. I know the feeling. Like I got there probably past midday on Thursday, and then Friday I was there, but then Saturday morning I was on the road again, and we're talking about NAM. I don't know if we've mentioned that so far, but we're talking about Summer NAM in Nashville. Yeah. But yeah, well, there was something and we'll get into telling your story here in a minute. But
That's fine.
I thought this would be a good segue into you messaged me. I was actually at where was that? Groon Guitar with
Oh, that's right.
with Corey Nigro and
Mm-hmm.
Sean Arbo at the time, and you messaged me and said, "Hey, where'd you go?" And I think this was like on Friday, and and I was like, "Well, I'm not at NAM right now." And so, anyways, we did a little bit of juggling back and forth. But you had a prototype that you wanted me to kind of bring over to the podcast house and let everybody take a turn and play.
And you were very cool enough to come to the hotel that I was at and pick it up because we were on our way going somewhere else. So yeah, it was really cool that you and Corey were able to grab it.
Yeah, well, I was stoked to do it, and so it was no problem to go to do that. We were excited to try it, and I really it was a really fun pedal. Now I only got probably about 10 minutes in because everybody was taking turns and it's crazy loud in there. And so I didn't get very much time, but what the little bit I played, I was really digging the concept. And so are you at liberty to kind of talk about what that is?
Yeah, sure. It's I haven't made it a huge secret. I think I've put a few things on Instagram. The Canalia is pretty straightforward. The Cherry Box is our kind of nutso schizo fuzz. I really wanted to have a very user-friendly dirt box, so I came up using parts of the Boss Tone circuit, but reworking it so it's almost not even the same circuit. But I wanted to have a dirt box that you can do basically an OD to like absolute meltdown fuzz. And the way that I thought to do that and still make it flexible is to be able to switch in and out the aspect that causes the circuit the sag to basically voltage starve it and turn it into a fuzz. So I wanted to make kind of a everything box as much as you can. I mean, nothing is. If you're jack of all trades, master of none. I definitely didn't want to go that route, but I did want to have like hit a couple notes no pun intended, in terms of I wanted it to be a great fuzz, I wanted it to be a good dirt box, and then anything in between, you can pretty much get there. And this will also be our first foray into. We're going to go into a metal box with this one.
Okay.
Yep, and it'll be a custom box, but it along with it going into a metal box, it's also going to have a lower price point than some of our other stuff. So it's us trying to provide something for players to be able to use, kind of a little bit more broader. Also doing it at a very reasonable price. Also doing it in a smaller footprint. We're not known for our smaller pedals, and this one is going to be in a 125 Hammond. So it's going to be basically MXR size box. So yeah, and that's the story behind that.
Well, and we're talking about enclosures, and so the Canalga and the cherry box are in a wooden enclosure, and we chatted briefly, and you introduced me to your wife, Colette, and she's the one designing these. Is that correct?
Yeah, she the Canalga wasn't really. I had come up with the concept of using a wooden enclosure along with a friend of mine, Bob Savage, out in California. And he had a CNC, and he's a player, and he's actually been in, a couple bigger bands. And he's been a woodworker for a long time. So I kind of talked to him back and forth, and we kind of came up with the concept of a wooden enclosure, and that's what the Canalga kind of turned into. It's pretty simple in terms of graphics and stuff. Colette took over coloring and finishing the boxes about 2.5, almost 3 years ago. She is the sole design on the cherry box.
Okay.
So that's her baby, but the coloring and the finishing she also does on the Canalga. So basically from here out, she's doing all the aesthetic design and functional layout of our pedals. I really enjoy doing the circuits. I really enjoy coming up with the concepts of what I want them to do. And it just works out really well. She's got a great head for it. She's very talented in terms of, being able to do the artistic aspect of it. And so yeah, in to shorten your answer, yeah, she's basically designing the aesthetics, layout, and the composition of the boxes right now.
Very cool. Very cool. Well, I think that there's something that I'm really interested in, and we'll maybe this can kind of tie into your story a little bit.
Okay.
If you want to rewind once I get into it. But there's one thing that in our conversation back and forth, I think I heard you mention about working as a repair tech on amplifiers and I think it's not like we've had a long lengthy conversation on it, but in passing in the groups, you've talked about this particular amp circuit and what's good and what's trash maybe and so I thought it would be really cool to kind of gravitate towards that for a minute and kind of talk about some of the circuits that you like, what you've learned from that, and then if you want to kind of bring us up to speed on how you got into that kind of work and world and how maybe that ties into Lollygagger.
Yeah, sure, no problem. I went. I think I've said this on a few other casts. I actually went to electronics school that was specifically based on music electronics. It was a 3-year program, and it went from anywhere from analog to digital systems, and that would encompass anything from repair to maintenance to building to anything in that realm. I personally was never a huge digital guy. I did what I had to do to get through those parts of the
Mm.
course. My love was always analog, and more specifically, tube amps. And my love for tube amps is just I've had friends of family, being a kid and seeing a silver face Fender Twin and poking around in it, being 6 or 7, and touching the glowy light and burning my finger and all that stuff. But it's my grandfather was an electrical engineer, so basically it was my love of old vintage electronics based with the fact that I was a musician. So I went to school, I got my degree, got out, and then I teched for about on and off for like 15 years.
Okay.
But I would do stints where my first amplifier company I worked for was Naylor Engineering, which was down in Detroit at the time. Now it's based in Texas. And I also worked for Gytron Amplification, which I believe now is in Washington or Oregon, I think. I love tube amps, and the part of the tube amps that I like is I like that as close to what you can find or define as magic
Mm-hmm.
is in a tube amp. And let me kind of describe what I'm meaning there is that digital is a very precise, and there's nothing wrong with it, but it's a very precise medium. And, it's ones and zeros, it's clock pulses and all that stuff. Is interesting how you can have one Fender, let's say like a deluxe reverb, a blackface, a 65 or a 66,
Mm-hmm.
and you could put it next to another one that's maybe 4 months older or 4 months younger, and how they can sound maybe not remarkably different, but how they can sound relatively different. And that could be anywhere from the tolerances in the parts, from how well or how much it was used comparative to maybe it sat in a closet. And to me, that's the fascination to me with tube amp circuits, especially vintage type ones, because a lot of those amplifiers were not set up for efficiency. I mean, your Leo Fender honestly really didn't have a lot of idea what he was doing, at least other than the fact that he knew how to make an amplifier circuit. It wasn't until years later where you start getting into ultra linear and you start working with higher tolerance parts that like a lot of amp builders use today. To me, I always liked that. I don't want to use the word sloppy, but I always liked that loosey goosey thing because sometimes, not too unlike a vintage pedal, you can play 2 or 3 of them and then you play that one and you're like, I I don't know what it is. I have no idea why this
Yeah.
particular amplifier is got me, but it does. And to me, that's kind of the magical quality of it to me. So I've just always been fascinated. So yeah, I've repaired, I've built on my own. Not as a company, but for friends and doing, client on a couple people that I knew. But someday, probably not for quite a while, but someday, LollygaggerFx may turn into Lollygagger Engineering,
Okay.
and that would probably inhabit tube amplifiers to some degree.
Okay. Well, I don't have anywhere near that kind of knowledge of tube amps, other than I've been shocked quite a few times by some Fender silver faces.
Yeah, I've been bit. I mean, even now, occasionally, you're in a hurry, and
Yeah.
that's why you always put one arm behind your back when you're
Yeah.
playing around with high voltage things.
Yeah. That's what I guess one of my questions is, and hearing you talk about that, and I that just catches my interest too, because I believe there is magic in um those circuits.
Hmm.
Um, what did you find that you were able to somehow be able to crack that code over time, knowing what parts did what, and finding, oh, okay, this makes sense, and um basically like maybe what would be the best version of a blackface deluxe or something like that.
Yeah, I mean, you get some of it. The Unfortunately, a small aspect of that is time. Um, Time has a tendency to change all our instruments in one form or another. Vintage guitars tend to sometimes sound better than newer guitars, not necessarily because they were built better, but you have a guitar that's made with a more quality piece of wood that's dried. So now that it has more, sustain to it or different timbre or whatever. Same thing with tube amplifiers. You can have an amplifier that maybe even had tighter tolerances at one time, and let's say the cathode resistor, it drops down to 20% efficiency. So you were at a certain resistance, and now you're lower than that, and that makes the biasing of the tube a little bit different.
Mm-hmm.
And then those are the things that you write down when you go, okay, yeah, I'm really digging this. I like it biased a little bit hotter than like they came out of Fender. There is a lot of in this day and age, a lot of amplifiers are biased in a realm that is the safest for the equipment, but is not um, good enough, in my opinion, for getting great sound quality.
Mm-hmm.
So whenever you get a new Fender or a Marshall, it really doesn't hurt if you have the dollars, usually not very much, and take it to your favorite tech and have them tune it. Have them bias the tubes. They're generally really cold, so the distortion on them is really gritty, and those are the things that. And I understand why they do it, because like I said, they don't want to have catastrophic failure. Let's say you have a tube. Tubes they're not all the same. One, even in the same company, even in the same batch. So if you have tubes that are maybe not as hardy as another one, and you have a biasing that's a little bit different, it might blow out a tube. So what they do is they try to find a medium that works, that they feel they'll be safe enough, where the customer isn't calling them up after buying their amp for a week, and now it doesn't work.
Yeah.
So biasing, looking at tolerances on parts. I mean, Eddie Van Halen's Marshall, I think at one point there was a few techs that actually went through and measured every component in that amplifier and inspected out comparative to what it was supposed to be. And then I know there's a couple builders that can pretty much, for the most part, build that amplifier now. And that is a lot of it's not always I use these tubes, or I use this output transformer, or I only use 1% resistors, or I only use carbon comp, or,
Mm.
stuff like that. I will tell you there's some things that my instructor was a guy named Ed Merwin. Ed Merwin was 4'2". He had an afro, and he played country music. He was an odd duck, really super nice guy, but he was a stickler about a few things. His thing was electrolytic caps in power circuits.
Mm-hmm.
When you get an amplifier and it has a cap or a series of caps that have been in there a very long time, that is no longer a vintage piece of a part for an amplifier. There's no such thing as vintage electrolytic
Right.
caps. Electrolytic caps are there to do a function. If it doesn't do that function, then you wouldn't buy, a '63 Corvette and keep the same tires on it. You wouldn't do that because they'd be rotted out and bald and whatever. So when there are people that are just like, I would never touch the caps in my amplifier. Well, I'm not that much of a purist. To me, your power supply is what makes everything run, and it makes everything quiet. And if you have old electrolytic caps in your power supply, there is no exception, in my opinion. You replace them.
Yeah.
But other than that, man, a lot of that stuff is really cool. To me, one of the cool things about opening up an old amplifier, especially if it's one I haven't opened before or only a couple times, it's always interesting to see how the factory person put it together, because they're all pretty much, at least the vintage stuff is all pretty much signed or QC'd or dated. So you can get certain people that will wire an amplifier a little bit differently. So it's kind of like a little, I don't know, kind of like a little stroll through history.
Mm-hmm.
You would see the inside of this amplifier and you're going, okay, well, cool. I really like how they ran the heater wires this way, That's the stuff why I like tube amps. It's just that not one is exactly like the other one.
Yeah.
They're all a little bit different, or they can be completely different. And to me, that's the kind of the crush I have on them, as opposed to I like amplifiers that are made today. I mean, Fender makes some great stuff still. Marshall makes some really good stuff still. Even Mesa, which is not one of my favorite amplifier brands, but for what they do it really well. But you just put all that information after time and time of testing and running biases and replacing parts, and you start having a notebook of all these little tiny things that you've noticed, and then you use that information to kind of come up with the circuit. Maybe it's right there. Maybe you're like, bam, I'm good. This is exactly what I want. Maybe you're like, yes, there's something here I maybe have to change for whatever reason. It's a little bit bright or a little shrill for me. So you might have to go off course of what you put down in your notebook on what you liked from a particular set of amplifiers or an amp.
Yeah.
But that's where the building and that's where the design comes in.
Well, I remember there was some thread in one of the gear groups, one of the many that we all frequent. And you had mentioned a particular amp that was a good budget amp that you see going for super cheap. That it was comparable to a Marshall, I believe what you had said. And I wanted to ask you about that. I think it was the PV Windsor.
Oh yeah, the Windsor. I used to. I haven't done it in a long time, but I used to do these things. I think on Tone Mob, where I would put stupid Facebook deal of the day.
Yeah.
And it's not really that much of a deal because you can get a PV Windsor. It's a 100 watt head, and it's basically set up like a JCM 800. And there's some differences in there, but that's what it's trying to go for. So you can buy a $200 tube amp, okay, that can get you at least 3/4 the way there. And if it fell off the back of your truck, you might be annoyed. You might be like, crap. But if it was, a good example, like a Fryette or, who does the Dirty Shirley? I'm having a brain fart right now. Blah, 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 blah.
I know what you're talking about. It's on
but So some of those, I wouldn't say clones, but amplifiers that are based along that Friedman amplifiers, excuse me, that are based along taking Marshall circuits and relatively staying pretty close to what they're doing. Those are $2,500 amplifiers. So, in my opinion, and this is just my opinion, those are great amplifiers to have in your studio or in your home. But if you're playing, Jacob's Bar Blues and Oysters on a Saturday night, and people are loud and drunk,
Yeah.
and you just want to kick some ass with some music, yeah, heck yeah. Get the PB Windsor, put it out there, obviously take it to a tech, go through all the things you need to go to make it bulletproof. But yeah, there's lots of amplifiers that are like that are trainer amplifiers from Canada. You can get vintage trainer amplifiers for next to nothing. Well, they've gone up in price a little bit, but used to be able to get them next to nothing. And they were every bit as good as Fender amplifiers. And they were built like, brick houses
Yeah.
and stuff like that. People get a little too, in my opinion, get a little too caught up in names or brands sometimes, and that's not to say that there's not any reason behind that, but, sometimes do a little research and, you will find some really great stuff out there that's not expensive, that's really great sounding, and is relatively rugged. And if it isn't rugged and it breaks down, you're not crying because you got to fix your $2,500 tube amp.
Right. Well, that kind of sparks my curiosity. Then, you mentioned a good JCM 800 kind of substitute in the Windsor, and the trainer with Fender. What would be like a good AC 30 or AC type budget amp?
Ooh, that's a hard one for a couple of reasons. I will claim pretty much mostly ignorance on ACs. Uh, I know the circuits. I'm familiar with the amplifiers, but I'm not particularly a big fan of Vox. Not because I don't think they're great amplifiers. They don't suit my playing.
Mm-hmm.
So it's not something that I strive to ever get or want when I was a kid or even now as an adult. So, and since it's, for whatever reason, it seems like Vox and the AC um, series, it seems to me they kind of were left alone in terms of, copying in the late 60s, 70s. Now, obviously, there's a there's a really nice boutique amplifiers that are doing that are very much in along the lines of trying to do the box thing and doing it really great. Top Hat was one for a long time. There's a few others, um, but that's kind of an odd duck. I don't ever really think off the top of my head, uh, and maybe that's because that amplifier and that circuit, that was, for whatever reason, Marshall did well here. It took a while, but they came here, and I have a feeling, what it was. Pete Townsend and Jimi Hendrix weren't bringing boxes on the stages
Mm-hmm.
when they were touring America. It was High Watts and Marshalls. So when people see that or they hear it or, they're enveloped by the whole thing, those were the amplifiers that made it over here because they were, brought over from England. There wasn't a lot of that, in my opinion. And like I said, I'm not really super knowledgeable about that, but there wasn't really a lot of that for Vox. And if it was, Pete Townsend wasn't jumping up and down on his box, and smashing it with a guitar. So when you see iconic pictures or film of that, that just sticks in your head then.
Right. Well,
So maybe that's maybe why you don't see a lot of that.
yeah, I can see that because, and it's not really the case right more anymore because I think like the used markets have gotten so like where there are people flipping to the point
Mm-hmm.
where there's not like a lot of surprises anymore.
No.
But I know like kind of in my local market, like the greater New Orleans area,
Mm-hmm.
um, it, for a while there, it was like it was a silver face Fender graveyard. I mean,
Oh
they were
yeah.
everywhere, and
Yep.
and that speaks to this. Probably was a lot of those being bought, sold way back when that are just out there. They're mass produced. Not as much as Marshall, but you see some of that. But I've never, I don't think, hardly ever seen any vintage Vox stuff out there in the wild that shows up on the classifieds.
No, you really don't. And the thing about the the Vox stuff is, for the longest time it was made in England. So it wasn't until later in history where it was either made in China or wherever. Uh, you obviously could get your English Marshalls, or you can get them wherever. But so, since there wasn't a location other than England, I think that's why you don't see a lot of it. And I'm just speculating because, like I said, I'm not a Vox expert by any means. But the silver face thing I find kind of funny, because that to me is all a period of time. Okay, in the early '80s, you couldn't give away silver face basements. You couldn't. You couldn't. I mean, you could buy. I'm not lying. You could go and buy a silver face basement for $100.
Yeah.
Okay, all day long. You could even like the most sought after amplifier, like a super reverb, you could pick up for $400. Maybe even $300. But what happens is time shifts. So what was not relatively vintage in the early '80s, near the late '90s, is now considered vintage. So there is this degree of, I can't purchase a blackface because its price range is way out of my league. This amplifier is not too far away in terms of the time period it was built, and it's less money. And for the most part, is really kind of close to where you're at. I mean, there's some things you might need to do, but so I think as the '90s went on, there was this more of a, I mean, like I said, you could buy silver faces for nothing. I don't think I could buy a silver face twin, probably less than $1,000 right now,
Mm-hmm.
maybe, and that would be at the very lowest. And now I've seen it with, you're familiar with the evil twins, right?
Yes. The red
Yes,
knob, right?
the red knob.
Yeah.
Those are starting to go up in price now,
Yeah, which I
because,
don't get.
well, and that's what I'm trying to say. I think there's a part of its memory. Okay, if you played through a red knob Fender, it wasn't that great. Okay, but if you're 25 and you're reading vintage guitar and you want a tube amp and you see a Fender and it's a tube, and you're like, I just want to get in, and you go and you buy it. Enough people either buy them and truly like what they do, or have the sense to take it to a tech to kind of fix a few things. But you know that's that's where I think age and time kind, cause like, I think of vintage equipment, I think early blackface is, to me, is like, or mid '60s blackface, to me, I think that's near the end of the vintage. I
Mhm.
used to think that, and now, uh, up until about '78, well, a lot of those amplifiers are perfectly fine. You need to do some things to them, and the thing for the longest time, the big deal to me was the Silverface Drip Edge, because essentially that was a blackface amplifier.
Mhm.
So you could go and get yourself a Bassman, Silverface Drip Edge, and you could pay maybe $200, $250, and there wasn't a lot of, the internet was just starting to come online. People weren't quite sure or savvy enough to pick. You could pick those up, and you had a blackface basement, and essentially, and as the internet gets bigger and bigger, more people start reading and become educated, and then the drip edges, they started going up in price. So I don't think that'll ever stop. I think, honestly, there will probably be some amplifiers that are relatively unique that are built today. I mean, they would have to be enough of a departure from other circuits where, yeah, they'll be vintage 20 years from now.
Yeah, it'd be interesting to see what happens. I know, like for instance, like Fender is cranking out models left and right. I think it was a couple years ago they had the bass breakers, and that didn't seem to be a huge hit, but it really seemed like a cool thing. And I don't know what the reliability of them are, but I could see where that's kind of a thing that the market leaves behind, and 15, 20 years, like, oh, somebody stumbles on it and uses it to record on a certain track, and everybody's
you are absolutely correct. That will be an amplifier that people will come around to again. It's a great amplifier for what it does. It's one of the few Fenders that had a dirt channel that was worth anything. And they're small. They got a great tone, and they're relatively good with pedals. So it's one of those things. If I got a 20-watt amplifier that can get Fender clean with a decent overdrive channel, and I can throw a couple pedals in front of it, that's a studio recording amp all day long.
Yeah,
you know what I mean.
absolutely.
And I think there will be stuff like that out there that are a little bit kind of here's a good one. Good example. The Riviera Super Champ. Okay, when Paul Rivera came on and took over Fender, and he was part of what was going on with Fender, with the red knob and all that stuff. But he devised the Super Champ. The Super Champ is a killer recording amplifier. It has a really good dirt channel. It has a really great clean channel. It's in a small package, and it's a loud amplifier for what it is. You can't go online. I don't think you can pick up one for less than $500, and generally they're more than that. And that's a case of people just someday, maybe 20 years ago, going, those were great amplifiers. Why? And then, or they remember they had one as a kid, or their neighbor had one, and they go on eBay and they buy them for next to nothing. And then all of a sudden, people get this knowledge. This is a snapshot in time, this amplifier, that people ignored or really didn't understand how to use it. And it comes back around, and it's a very sought after amplifier. Then Fender comes out 6 years ago and makes this atrocity that's nothing like that amplifier, trying to cash in on the name or whatever. But yeah, you're right, there will be things like that. And pedals too is a good example. There's there are like pedals that were decent pedals, or even good pedals, that maybe went under the wire, or people took it for like, okay, whatever. And then for whatever reason, the TS 808 is a good example. I mean, I don't think we would be scrambling around, trying to find the best TS pedal, or a vintage 808 or a Maxim 808, if it wasn't for SRV.
Right.
I mean, let's be fair. I mean, that's really, there was other players using them, but Stevie Ray Vaughan, you had to have a super reverb, or an amplifier like that. No one could afford a Dumble, so you can ignore that. Or you needed to find a tube screamer. And at the time, you could get them for relatively cheap. And everyone gravitates to a person where they're like, I want that sound. And it only comes every once in a blue moon when you get a guitarist that has a whole package. And you're just like, I want that sound. So you go out and buy that sound, and then it just avalanches.
Yeah.
It never will go away. I mean, the TS will, the 808 and even the 9, I mean, they're always going to go up in price. They're never going to go down in price, because now there's a legend, or a mystique, or dare I say mojo, about that pedal, And it's a fine pedal. There's nothing wrong with it. It's a good pedal. I tend to not like tube screamers, but that's just because, again, it's not my playing style. But there, usually, if something like that goes up to a really exorbitant amount of money, they generally never go back.
Yeah.
They may hover, they might tip a little bit down, but they generally always will go up in price just because there's a momentum, there's a mystique. I mean, the Klon, that's another great example of a really good pedal that a couple players started using them and prominently telling people they were using them, and because it was to be perfectly honest, one of the Finnegan was one of the first boutique one-man shows, so he wasn't crapping those out at 500 a day or whatever. So it's a great pedal that was scarce, and some people decided that was their thing and they went and bought them, and because they're scarce and because they started going up in price, people kept them. And now if you want one, you're talking, you can maybe get one for $1,800, but generally they're all over $2,000.
Yeah.
Depending on the shape, So I mean, that's how I feel about that.
Well, you mentioned some of those circuits, though some of those classic circuits just kind of didn't fit your playing style. So I guess I'm very curious if that was kind of the reason to develop your own pedals, was to do something that you were stoked about.
I learned from not just one person in particular, but a handful of builders. Build pedals for yourself and put them out there, and if people like them and buy them, that's great. But you can't build pedals, in my opinion, because you think a certain person or a certain group of people,
Mm-hmm.
you're catering to that need, because how many clones are out there right now? I think there's probably 50 more than there really needs to be. To me, sometimes, unless you're doing something really unique or different with the circuit, you're just kind of providing a product, which is fine if you want to do that, for somebody who is willing to get something like that because they can't afford the original thing. I built the Cherry Box because I like my fuzz pedals to be really messed up. I like them to fart. I like them to oscillate. I like them to do weird things. I like them to work really hand in hand with an amplifier. I don't, I generally don't like fuzzes that, you can put into a clean amp and they're sound like a fuzz. I tend to like fuzzes that are a little bit lower in gain and push the front end of an amplifier, because to me, there tends to be a natural kind of sag, a give and take thing, depending on how hard you're hitting the strings. So I've had people say, "Hey, I'm getting a fuzz for the first time. What fuzz should I get?" And someone might, not many, but somebody might say, "You should get a Cherry Box." If I see that, I will generally say, "No, do not buy a Cherry Box," because this is a fuzz that for a certain type of player. So I built that for myself. The Canalia to me, I like Fender Deluxe reverbs, but I really like them to have a, kick butt sound. I really like to hit the front end, but I don't want to use a clean boost because that just makes the amp louder with a little bit of breakup. So what I did is I basically took the idea of, I really want kind of a boost, but I want it to have some grit, and I want it to have, lack of better words, just girth. And that's why I came up with the Canali, again, because it was something I wanted. And, I put it out there, and hey, I was lucky. There's people that felt the same way. I generally am the guy who will tell you, I don't think that's something that'll work with your setup. Somebody said, "Hey, I got the solid state amplifier. I really dig it. and I'm using this guitar. I really want your pedal. And I will just say, that's great. I'm willing to sell you my pedal, but
Mm-hmm.
I really don't think it's something that's going to work for you. This pedal is really made to push the front end of a tube amp or some kind of, like a stomp or something like that, that the parameters were set up to be pushed by the front end, some kind of, like an FX or something like that. They have the ability to take in that signal and use that. And that's fine. That's great. I know I have plenty of customers that have a HX stomp, or they have the FX, or they have the other modeling amplifiers that are out there, and the Canali works really well with them. But yeah, I mean, there's just something. Not every pedal or not every guitar or not every amplifier is always going to work for every
Yeah.
situation, and you have to be truthful about that. And sometimes, it sucks when you have to say, "I'm having a slow week. I would love to sell you this thing, but I have a feeling you're going to be disappointed because it's not really going to do what you want it to do." I much rather just or if they're adamant, fine, I'll move on with it. But if they understand, I much rather have that than have a review or have one dump one on Reverb because they're disappointed or whatever. I mean, to me, I build tools for players to feel like creating. And if you buy one of my tools and you feel like it should go in the closet, that's really not helping anybody, is it?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. Well, and I can't help but think like I went from a AC style amp to
Mm-hmm.
I found that the black bass Fender was really my favorite kind of tone
Mm-hmm.
after a while of shuffling between amps, and so I had to completely change my drive section until I was happy.
Right.
And I think that's like there's a lot of players coming up. They're trying to find their tone, their voice, what makes them happy. And you see so much on these groups where, oh, I got this pedal, it's amazing, and then 2 months later, well, I got this one, and it's like at this point in my playing, like I look at that and I say, well, they're just trying to figure out what they want
Mm-hmm.
because
Yeah.
it's a learning curve.
Well, and I think sometimes it truly is the person looking for the great search, for the grail.
Mm-hmm.
I also think that sometimes there are people that are very sensitive to what other people say.
Mm-hmm.
So let's say, I mean, good example, John Frusciante, his favorite wah is a crappy Yamaha plastic wah.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, it's not built really great, but it has this really unique wah sound. He's an individual who really did not care if you thought that was cool or not. He dug it. There might be somebody who's got some kind of overdrive, and some guy, they show a picture, they're proud of it, this is their thing. And maybe not anyone's being a jerk, but they're just saying, hey man, if you really want great tone, you really need to get this. So that guy saves up his pennies, he gets rid of that pedal he really did like, buys this other thing, and then either gets disappointed and gets the thing again, or convinces themselves this is really good. If you have to keep telling yourself this is a really good piece of gear, I really think I'm really. If you got to keep having that discussion with yourself in your head, then you might want to rethink if it's the piece of gear for you. You
Yeah.
know,
Yeah.
I mean, there's stuff I have that I have no question. That's like no, I that's all I'm playing. I'm perfectly happy with that sound or that thing. But part of the pedal thing, though, is it's for a very relatively low buy-in. You can get something different all the time.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, when you buy an amplifier, you're generally in for it, probably between $8,000. Okay, if you're talking about 30 to 50 watt, and you're not going to be flipping that every other week.
Mm-mm.
It's just. I mean, I know there are people that do, but it's really hard. and chances are you can lose money on it. Maybe you'll move up on it and then be able to get something. But for $150 pedal, you can buy it. You can even really dig it, but then you can sell it on Reverb for 120. You lose $30, and you're like, hey, I had 2 weeks, 3 weeks of time on that. I'm perfectly fine with that. Taking that money, adding a few more bucks to it, and getting that other thing you've been really wanting to get. So for a very low buy-in, you can experiment, and something new is always coming into your world, and that could be a really exciting, cool thing, um, And I used to be like that. I think a lot of people are, or still are. I'm more along the lines, I find a few things that I really like, and I keep them. That's not to say I won't bring, like, hey, I'm relatively new to modulation. I just picked up an MXR carbon copy. I've never been a modulation or delay
Mm-hmm.
kind of guy. I've always been dirt or wah. Um, and I'm really digging this pedal. It's really cool. Will I stick with it? Probably not, because this is kind of my first foray into messing around with it. Maybe I'll get something that has trails or whatever thing. But uh, there's dirt pedals I have. There are fuzzes that I will never get rid of.
Yeah.
My boy Leon, man, his Pelotar, I got 2 of them. They are never, ever leaving my sight. And I got the one with the GE with my other bud Brian. Those are never going to go anywhere. There's just certain things that I like, and I'm happy with them, and I'm never going to sell them. That's not to say I won't get anything else, but hey, to each his own.
Yeah. I think drive sections are kind of one of those things that if you land on something, you want to keep it. And I think a lot of like the delay and modulation and reverb and things like that. That's things I think that change with styles of music and time. And it's kind of, you see a lot of people chasing, I want this kind of reverb, and then it falls out of fashion, or it's a lot of factors.
I think that kind of stuff changes with technology.
Yes.
I mean, like right now, if anybody could afford one, everyone would have a Blue Sky right now.
Mm-hmm.
And that may stay that way for a long time, until the next big turn of technology happens. Where we're listening to 3D music or whatever. Um, Dirt is kind of one of those things that it is what it is, and small little nuances and changes happen all the time. So I think you're right. I think things like delay, reverb, you get your 3 or 4 companies that are really doing it and killing it, and somebody gets that piece of gear, they're not going to get rid of it unless they have bills to pay or something like that. But they're not going to get rid of it. They're like, I'm good with this until that next big thing comes in. I mean, let's be honest. When those guys came out with those pieces, with the Blue Sky and the Mobius and all that, that was amazing. It's still very amazing pieces of gear that do amazing things. And I don't see those coming off many people's boards anytime soon. But fuzz is like, you can have a new fuzz every day for 365 days a year, because every fuzz, for the most part, behaves differently, sounds differently,
Yeah.
does different things, and generally they all do it under a 20-part count, which is amazing to me. I mean, a fuzz face, there's 11 parts, 10 parts in that circuit, and it does so many different wild ass things. And then you can have a tone bender, which maybe has an extra transistor and maybe a couple more parts. That sounds completely different. Talking Mark III, sounds completely different than a fuzz face.
Hmm.
And it, just to have talking about mojo with amplifiers, fuzzes are like that to me too. How just a little bit different, the tolerance, or you bias the transistor a little bit differently. That's one of the things when I came up, the proto, the little D, I wanted to be able to have that bias control. So you can have that tighter type fuzz, or you can have that really spurty on the cusp of dying type fuzz, because, or you could buy 3 or 4 fuzzes that do all those things in increments. And I said, no, I'm going to put that in one box.
Yeah. Well, jumping off that, you sent me a let me back up. I sent you a DS1 that I had. Basically, I had a DS1 donated to me by a cousin that had given up playing guitar, and that just shows you how popular that pedal is. Like everybody had one.
And you went, thanks.
Yes. I was like, I know exactly what I want to do with this. Well, I didn't know exactly what I wanted to do, but I knew I wanted it to change because I don't really enjoy a DS1, as it is. And right. So you said, hey, I think I've got something interesting I can do with it. And you kind of played with it for a while, and you sent it back to me, and I really dug what you did with it. You basically put your cherry pit.
Well, no, we gotta back up a little bit.
Yeah.
I sent it to you.
Yeah.
And it made a lot of bad noise, and you
were
like,
fault.
And you were like really freaked out, and I was really freaked out, and I'm like, just send it right back to me. I'll take a look at it. And it's just like anything else. You don't think about just checking the simplest things. And had Brian not had the same problem, his pedal with your amp, we would have probably maybe not even figured out it was the cable, which was just really funny, But
yeah,
anyway,
that was one of my like, oh man, I should have thought. But basically, what I was doing, I had a TC flashback.
Oh, that's right. It was the power supply,
and I was using that to power because I was like, well, it has a lot of milliamps on it. And for some reason, with those dirt pedals, like it just wouldn't. It just injected a lot of noise into it. And so I was like, oh my goodness, what is going on here? But when we got that figured out and melded back and forth a couple times, we figured out that was the issue. But you employed basically your take for. You told me it's kind of like a DS1's kind of like trying to polish a turd.
Yeah, kind of.
It's you can only go so far with it, but you put your cherry pit, what you call the cherry pit mod, in there, which when I played the cherry pit, the cherry box at NAMM, and then also your prototype, I could definitely hear, there was similarities.
Yeah, definitely.
So, I guess my question is, tell us a little bit about that mod, if you will. And I know you have it available. I've been watching. There's a couple people who have went on to do the same thing. Are you doing? And then I guess my other question would be, after you answer that, are you doing this with any other pedals?
Okay. Well, the terms of the DS and what's going on there, I did some things that are relatively normal that a lot of people do. I put in some diode switching. Nothing earth-shattering. I did a germ clipping, and then I did an asymmetrical clipping, and then I did a lift, which a lot of people don't do with that pedal. I don't know why, but it sounds really great with no clipping in it. And then I changed the tone stack on it. One of the few issues I have with the DS is that you really only use the center section of the tone stack. If you go all bass, it just muds out, and you can't do anything with it, in my opinion. If you go the opposite way, and it just shrills right out and pierces dog's ears from a half a mile away. What I did is essentially changed the tone stack so now that it's a high mid and a low mid. So it allows you, that sweet spot is more of a little bit wider sweep, but it's, you're no longer having to move just micro, spaces in the center to get that sound you wanted. But the cherry pit mod, a lot of people. Let me just say too that the DS1 is people consider it the holy grail of a mod bed in terms of using that circuit to do many cool things. It's just the way it's designed. I mean, it's a relatively cool pedal if you use it for certain things, but the way it's designed, it is allowed to be able to do lots of neat external things to it, to shape it and morph it and do whatever. One of the cool things that people like to do with that is to do some feedbacking and do some oscillation type stuff. There's the simple mod where you jump a wire between this spot and this spot and turns it into an oscillation octave type thing. What I wanted to do, and one of the things that I thought that the DS1 would sound really great at, is if you could mess around with the voltage going into the op amp. And if you could take that voltage and sag it either extremely and turn it into a bit crusher type tone, or just a little bit to make it so that there's a little bit of sag, so it's got a little bit more give to it. It's a little bit warmer. It gets a little dirtier, a little warmer. That's was the impetus for me doing the cherry pit mod. And I'm sure there are other people that have done things kind of like that. I think where I've done it, it's at least to me, I'm sure I'm wrong. I'm the only one that I know that's doing it, and I know for a fact that I'm the only one's doing it that's externally switchable with the adjustment,
Mm-hmm.
which is always been my thing with my pedals, is that if you have an adjustment that alters the sound or the playing ability of your pedal, you should be able to move that in real time. And
Yeah.
and what I'm saying is foot switchable. Some people are perfectly happy leaving it in one aspect of it. Yours, I put in the soft switching in it, and then I also made the cherry pit to be switchable in and out of the circuit. So I mean, you can have your relatively good low to mid overdrive, because I take a lot of that harshness out of the distortion. And then when you want to kick it in for a little bit heavier tone or to whack it out, you can, on the fly, you can switch it in and out.
Yeah. Which I like that reasoning, because if I know there's a lot of, for instance, this is a good example. In the delay and reverb and all that stuff, there is so much options in chips and stuff that you
Mm-hmm.
can't. Obviously, you can't put a real time, um, on off switch for all that kind of stuff. Like that's why they resort to dip switches and things like that. But
Mm-hmm.
I think on something like a drive pedal, you don't want something stuck in one place. Like, you want to be able to control it and be able to tweak those parameters. So I'm
Mm-hmm.
right there with you on that.
Yeah, to me, and again, I'm not the first person who's ever come up with that kind of a concept, but I see it. I I'm disappointed that I don't see it enough in a lot of pedals. Um, I see manufacturers do like a toggle switch. Like, hey, if you want this boost, just hit this toggle and it'll throw the boost in front of the overdrive or whatever. And more in the last 5 years, I've seen that more of a foot switchable option. But to me, I always thought that was like you're doing an either or an or in that situation. It's like if you're jamming, the last thing you want to do is get on your knees and hit a toggle switch. I mean, to me, that you have something with great ability to do something really neat and different, but now you just kind of neutered it because it's not functional. A tweak on the fly, be able to just hit a foot switch.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I think like the best example of that comes to mind, you're talking about differences in controls, is like I saw a YouTube demo, and it was like the Keeley Caverns, the
Mm-hmm.
the Wampler Ethereal, I think, and then it was maybe it was EHX Canyons or something like
Yeah, the
that.
Canyon. Yeah.
And they're all so basically they all have that ambient sound. Okay,
Hmm.
but and they all produce it because the technology's there in each one.
Hmm.
What's different is their approach in each of those pedals to how to control those parameters.
Right.
And that was their each take and their take on what they were going to release as a pedal, and um, they all I think do what they do well, but like which one would be the right one for you depends on what's important to you and how you want to control your parameters. So
No,
there's some
yep.
give and take because it's not it's not like a blue sky or a um timeline or anything.
Well, it's to me that's when like a company like Chase Bliss
Mm-hmm,
comes to mind when you can uh, set the parameters on what you want to switch to do,
mm-hmm,
to a degree. I think the one of the trends in the next coming years is that you will see pedals with assignable second switching. Whereas if you want it to be your second switching to be, I just want this to control the trails on my delay, or I want this to be a volume swell, or I want this to make it go into like a stutter type situation, that you will be able to either by soft switching a program into it, like when you do tap tempo, or to do what Chase Bliss is doing, and you do a toggle, a dip switch, and set it that way. I think players and people that create now want to have maybe not option paralysis, but they want to have the ability to tweak their equipment so it works for them. And to me, I don't think that's saying a lot to be able on devices like delays and reverbs and such. Those are already programmable devices for the most part. So why not program or set the ability of that second switching to work on the parameter you want it to work on?
yeah, yeah. Well, I couldn't even think like when I was getting into going to these trade shows, and now it's changed. Like a few years ago, it was a lot of work was being done in mod companies who were developing pedals that were kind of interfacing with these to make it do things that it didn't do.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't see quite as much of that right now. And I'm wondering it's because they're catching on to, hey, we could do this, and you know that's not needed anymore.
Yeah, well, and there's stuff like when the Wazacraft stuff came out. Um, I think Boss had kind of taken a lay of the land and was seeing what was happening to their gear
Mm-hmm.
in terms of secondary modding or people doing knockoffs. Knockoff is not a good word. Doing representations of some of those pedals, but with these different changes or these added things. I think Boss said, "Yeah, you know what? We can do that too. Why don't we come up with this subsidiary, and we can do those cool things too with our own pedals, but in most cases be able to, within the switch or control, take it back to the original thing that you really dug."
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and I think that's cool.
Yeah, yeah. So much just available out there, and it's really cool where the market is, and to watch where it's going to at the same
Yeah, if I had a crystal ball.
time.
Well, I kind of called it a little bit this year. I had been seeing the trends. I mean, let's face it, I've always said right now is the golden era of music gear. Guitars are not built any cheaper and with more quality than they have been built in the last 10, 15 years. Pedals, same way, amplifiers, same way. When I was a kid, the first guitar I got was from Sears. It The neck was warped. The action was literally 3/4 high off the fretboard, and I played that guitar till I got a ton of carpal in my left hand. Now I can pick up any guitar from any of the major brands, whether it's Chinese or Mexican or whatever, and that guitar will play relatively good, with maybe a little minor attention to a few things. So when pedals, I mean, there's this large expanse of pedal builders that has come out in the last 10 years.
Yeah.
And that's perfectly fine. I don't personally see an issue with it with me. It's like the people who are doing good work, who are doing interesting things, and who can run a business, they will be fine. They will do fine. The ones that can't, they won't. But right now, pedals have not been any better than they've been right now, in my opinion. In terms of, I have a group of friends that are builders, and we all talk. And I know what these guys are putting in their stuff. The smaller guys.
Mm-hmm.
And I know they're not skimping. And I know lots of times they should be charging more than they are. And they know that. But their thing is they want their stuff to get out there in people's hands. And yeah, I mean, right now, if you want to buy a piece of gear and you're 15 years old, the horizon is yours. You can do whatever you want. You can go home. You can go online. You can buy Cubase. You can put it on your computer. You can hook up your interface that you paid $25 for, and you can essentially, through some apps and some plugins, you can record an album.
Yeah.
That has never happened in the past of music up until about maybe 10, roughly 15 years ago. Now anybody can do an album. And people would say, yeah, but that's bad because that means there's a lot of crap out there and stuff. Well, that's fine. But you know what? It all filters out. It all, the cream rises and the rest doesn't. And if that happens, then you're not the cream. You might have to rethink your approach or what you're doing. If you are, then don't take that for granted. You continue running with the ball and doing the best you can.
Yeah, and that's the thing. I don't know. Like I said, we don't have a crystal ball. We can't see what's gonna happen with the market. But to me, it seems like that if that's the case, then the market that what's happening right now is just the tip of the iceberg as far as the market can go and how big the pie actually is.
Mm-hmm.
That it ought to be where there ought to be, if there's a lot of builders putting ideas out there, that okay, not everything is going to be like mass produced thing. There's a market segment for every little thing somebody wants to do.
Oh, definitely. I mean, and I am lucky enough to be in a community in what I do that there is very little. There's always ribbing and messing around, but there's very little hard competition between the 20 or so builders that I know. Because you know why? We all kind of really do something different. I mean, sure, everyone has an OD. Not everyone has a wood enclosure OD. Okay. Or, John from, EHE. I mean, this guy comes up with these incredible overdrives and dirt boxes that are amazing. He's doing his thing, and what I was going to say is I kind of called it. All these people had all these pedals and they didn't know what to do with them. So what happened is this year, and the year's still going a little bit, utility pedals. come
Mhm.
into play. Because now you have this pedal, and what can I do with it? Well, I could stick it in this cool switching type thing, or like Spaceman comes out with their thing, which is absolutely brilliant. Everything they make is cool beyond cool. Electro Harmonix comes out with their switcher system. All these cool products that are designed to take the pedals you already own and do something different with them. And I still think you're going to see kind of that more and more happening, because people get to the point where you have too much and maybe you don't want to get rid of any of it, but you're like, I'm bored. So if you can make a product that takes what you have already and make it do something incredibly different or cool or a little bit outside of what you normally do, then you're just rediscovering your gear again.
Mhm. Yeah, that I can see that totally. And it's just, I think, like you said, in the pedal market, it's easily for those who can, um, their paycheck or monthly gear acquisitions, and people plan on those things when like a guitar, an amplifier, or whatever might be. I'm stuck with this for 5 or 6 years.
Mm-hmm.
And so there's so much room available to people to try, and oh, I'm going to add this thing, I'm going to take this thing out, I'm going to put this in, and or put these together. I see so many custom runs, like, oh well, like Ryan Burke with 60 cycle hum,
Yep.
like a 250. Oh well, let's put two of them together.
Or guys like Walrus, they're like, hey, let's reprint our stuff in a different color or a different motif.
Mm-hmm.
Or Robert Keeley. I'm friends with Robert, and he does some really incredible, neat things. So he'll just like, and now that all his production is in under one roof for the most part, if he gets a itch up his butt, he'll just come out with some kind of weird thing,
Mm-hmm.
different color. Like good example, Chicago Music Exchange. They carry certain builds, or either certain builds or certain different aesthetically different changes on some builders that you can't get anywhere else. And that used to be truly a Eastern thing. The Japanese market, they wanted something that was different from the American market, or in Europe, maybe even to a lesser degree. Well, now it's not even, it's just going from one state to another. It's like, I want your pedal and your motif is black. I want them in pink.
Mm-hmm.
And I want to be the only one that sells that pedal in pink. And it's great because it allows that dealer to have your equipment, but they don't have to compete with anybody else if that person is looking for a specific difference. So if there's a dude who loves pink pedals and he wants to get himself a Timmy, there's only one place that sells pink Timmys. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
And I think that is something that was unheard of, you know, 10 years ago. I mean, it's like, like good example, 1981 Inventions, their DRV. They just started kicking out anything that was weird or neat colored. And I would know guys that were dropping their DRV and selling it so they can get their money so they can buy the black one.
And
And
that is next level gas right there.
that is what's going on. Oh, I want the rainbow one. I'm going to sell, or
Yeah.
or I'm going to sell these 5 pedals to get it. That's kind of, we're not the first ones to do it by any means, but that's where our head was when we came up with the concept of the Canalia, was that we needed to stand apart from everybody else, and not in just hey, look at us, but truly being something different. And we weren't making our pedals day glow or glow in the dark, or relic behind a truck or something. We really wanted to bring a whole new concept or newish. There was people done it way before I did, but we wanted to do it in the degree of it being a production run, not in my garage with a drill and a hammer and a chisel,
Mm-hmm.
and and a lot of people started following suit, and it's just as cool where people are like, I mean, I listen to the Tone Jerks all the time, and Kyle and Brian will just go on and on about, but I want that certain pedal that's that color or whatever, and that is the norm. It used to be the exception. It's not anymore. It's moving more and more toward the people want to be individuals, and they want people to see that I am different. This is my taste. This is what I like, and and it's a cool thing to show off your pedal board now. It's like pedal boards now. My buddy Spencer from West Coast Pedal Boards, he makes these beautiful, awesome, figured wood pedal boards. I remember when I made my first pedal board, I made it out of a pallet.
Mm-hmm.
I broke the wood off of it. It still had splinters sticking out of it. I velcroed or tied or glued. I don't remember my Boss and Dodd pedals on there, and that's what I did. But it's people take pride in what they own, and they take pride in what that stuff can do. And now it's just moving toward pedals. First it was guitars, and then it was kind of amplifiers, and now it's just moving to pedals, and now it's even going to cool things like guitar cables.
Yes,
And
that's what I was thinking at the same time. Yeah.
yeah, I mean, but that's great. It's just people want to be individual with their stuff, and sometimes it's hard to do that in terms of there's only so many circuits. Well, if I can't be individual or extreme individual that way, then I'll do it by the how my stuff looks or what I'm digging about it or whatever.
Yeah. Yeah, and it's really cool to see what the market dictates.
Mm-hmm.
And it's just a really cool time to be watching gear and being part of that culture. And watching builders like you do their take and I was talking with another builder on the last episode, and it was like it's one of the very few places where you find all of these builders collaborating or talking behind the scenes,
Uh-huh.
and there's a camaraderie there. It's not like this cutthroat car salesman thing where
No. Mm-mm.
uh-uh.
No, it's not. And good example. Yeah, he's on a builder board that I'm on that has probably about probably 30, maybe 35 members are on it. Not everybody's on there all the time, but it's there is degrees where we have chat rooms where we talk about, hey, I really need help with this circuit. I mean, in a lot of parts of business, who does that? Apple doesn't go to Microsoft and say, dude, I'm really having a hard time with my mouse. Can you give me a circuit idea? It's unheard of. It'll never happen. But there is so much of a unego, or people have enough ego in believing in what they do that they have no problem helping other people out. And there's all kinds of different types of tiers of builders that I talk to. I mean, you got Ryan from Fuzzerocious, who I think is a second tier, pedal builder. And then you got guys like, Alec from my bud downstate, and he's just starting into doing pedals, and he's doing great stuff. His black math is just insane. It's a great style of a muff, and I generally don't like big muffs, and his really does a really cool different take. So, and there's all these different people helping out, people needing help, and then we have boards where we just bitch about the day,
Yeah.
and it's great to have that camaraderie and a viewpoint from somebody who's in your shoes, or at least has been in your shoes, So, you can get a little commiseration going on. You're like, yeah, dude, I've been there. I've gotten 50 boxes from a company and they're all destroyed and crap. And now I'm out of enclosures for 3 months now because it's going to
Yeah.
take whatever,
Yeah.
blah, blah, blah. And it's nice to be able to talk to people like that and help you out when you're feeling down, or even say, hey, use these guys. This is what I use. I don't, we have a source forum where we talk about, hey, where can you get these knobs? And we'll like show a link to, hey, these are great knobs or whatever. I'm very lucky that I can call some of these people my friends or at least peers, and we can, coexist. And that's why I think in the pedal business, why you're seeing collaborations going on. I mean, everybody it's kind of cool. This is your thing. This is my thing. Let's put our thing and put it in a box. And sometimes you get something greater than the sum of all the parts.
Yeah. Yeah. It's wonderful, wonderful. Um, well, I'm sure most of our listeners are aware of Lollygagger, but if someone's new and they want to check out your pedals, point them to the correct place for me.
Okay, we are on the socials. We're on Facebook, LollygaggerFx. We are on Instagram, which is my preference for
Mhm.
talking to people or having people get a hold of us is on Instagram, but Facebook works well too. We're also on www.lollygaggerfx.com. And I'm in a lot of the boards because I always learn or try to help out with people digging their thing. And it's a really great way to stay abreast of what people like and don't. So if you just see my mug and one of the boards or whatever, say hey or DM me or whatever.
Yeah.
I'm always happy to help out, and that's where you can find us.
Cool. And if somebody has one of those DS1s sitting around collecting dust, they can contact you and hit you up and see how to make that happen as well, right?
Definitely. And I think you said a little while ago you asked if I was going to do that with another pedal.
Yes, I did.
I believe the Metal Zone is going to be the next thing I
Oh,
attack.
oh, yes.
So, I friend of all the shows and boards, Jason Fuzzmonger, is sending me one of his Metal Zones to play around with, and I've had some ideas for a while, but I'm going to put them into practice, and if things sound and turn out as cool as I think they're going to be, that'll be another one that we're going to start doing mods, and we're doing more repairs now too as well. Kind of opening it up a little bit. You get bored sometimes
Hmm.
building the same stuff over and over again. So repairs and mods, it keeps everything fresh.
Yeah. Well, that sounds really cool. Taking some of these um, pedals that are standards in the industry that have a lot of people aren't using them and collecting dust, seeing new life breathed into them. I think that's
I think it's amazing too. And and if it wasn't guys like Analog, Mike from Analog and all those guys and Keeley and Wampler and Josh at JHS, these guys, if you got something that's sitting around not doing what you want it to do, sometimes all it needs is a little TLC. Send it to your guy and make them do something weird with it or cool or make it work the way you want it to work.
yeah, yeah. Um, well, Sean, it's been amazing to. I felt like it was just fun to pick your brain tonight, and I had a tremendous time talking about the amplifiers, and I think I'm probably going to be hitting you up and asking you all kind of questions in the future. Um,
Wow.
but guys, if you're look into some of these amps that he mentioned, and I I think it's just been a really fun time, and I appreciate. I'm very happy that we finally were able to nail this down.
I am too. I am too. And maybe I'll start throwing stupid Facebook market day deals on your site.
Oh, I'd love it because um, I think that's the thing is like everybody has a scope of what they have experience with. But like when everybody collaborates together, oh well, I played this amp and it does this, and oh well, I never have put my hands on one of those. So it's cool. I never knew that a PV Windsor was close to a JCM 800, so that's good to know.
Yeah, and it's always cool. The more knowledge, hey, the life is better.
Yes, exactly. Well, thanks again, Sean.
Well, thanks for having me on, Clifton. I really appreciate it. I'm glad we got it to work out.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Thank you.